Terrific. So there is a little bit of a change up. So I'm actually the Director of Strategic Priorities at Delta, and Ryan is our Ecological Economist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about urban wood as a source for biochar. I'm going to talk a little bit about emerald ash borer, but I'm going to skip over some parts simply because Jim did such a thorough job this morning, and then talk about some of the economic opportunities that could arise from biochar. So the Delta Institute is a not-for-profit. We're located in Chicago, and we work on issues of environmental and economic significance. We have a 20-person staff, and we have a very multidisciplinary team. Typically, we work on waste, natural resources, and energy, and the sort of things that we do include developing innovative programs and market-driven solutions. We build sustainable markets, and we convene stakeholders. So we come to this from a little bit of a different perspective than some of the other speakers, but it's exciting to see the tent for biochar grow in this sort of way. So urban wood really refers to trees that are harvested from outside of traditional forests. So these are your streets, parks, private lands. And urban wood availability is really tied to forestry work and development. So tree removal or storm damage, storm cleanup, and site development is really when we have trees. And then, as you heard about, we have a lot of urban wood available now simply because of EAB as well as other pests. And so for Illinois, this is about 25 million trees, which is very significant. So we started experiencing impacts from EAB relatively early in 2006. So this is just a map so you can sort of see the spread of EAB. And this is actually an elderly map because now EAB has been found in Colorado. So this is something which is just going to continue to march westward. Oops. Okay. I'm going to skip over this because I think Jim explained earlier how ash trees are really killed by emerald ash borer. So we'll just keep moving. So what does this mean for us? We have all of these trees that are being removed. Ash trees represent in Illinois about 20% of the canopy, which is a significant number of trees. And when we started looking at this, we were really looking at this from the perspective of the Chicago metropolitan region. And that's simply because that's where EAB showed up first in our region. So what we know from active managers of trees, forest communities with very significant forestry programs, that they are already aware of, through their inventory programs, 277,000 trees that will need to be removed. So this is a significant number of trees, and this is something that, there are some options with treatment, but treatment only delays having to remove the tree later. So it's just going to happen. And working with Dan Casons from Purdue University, we were able to get a quantification of the amount of available biomass. So in terms of chips, looking at all the sources of urban wood and factoring in EAB, that's 142,000 tons of woody biomass in the Chicago metropolitan region. So we think that this is a significant source for biochar. We think that's very exciting. So one of the things which is interesting is that we came at urban wood looking at many other types of uses for urban wood, including furniture, lumber. But what we found is that because of when trees are removed, that 60% of what comes down is actually really chips. And that's because when you think of wood, you might think of the trunk of a tree, but actually the branches, the stems, and all of this other stuff is a significant mass. And then because of how tree care companies remove the trees, you actually end up with about 70% of the total mass from the tree being in the mulch and compost sort of category. And that's actually how it's disposed in the end. Now, one of the things which I want to allude to in earlier presentation is that if we look at urban wood as a source for biochar, it's going to be a mixed source. It is not going to be simply ash. And in green, I have highlighted what represents about 60% of the trees that are removed and felled from urban sources on an annual basis. And then you'll see that a large percentage of that is ash and oak. And then the next 40% is in blue, and that's maple, locust, and walnut. So what you're seeing there is a variety of different moisture levels, hardnesses, and so that's really going to impact how you're going to approach biochar for this. So in terms of looking at urban wood as a source for biochar, it's going to be multiple species. The chips that you get from the tree care industry when they're involved in removing the tree, the chips are going to be rough and irregular. And then while you can specify the type of chips, frequently very few people actually do specify the size. Sometimes when they specify the size, it's because the Illinois Department of Agriculture has some rules, and that's because they want people to chip down to a certain size. But beneath that, there can be some variation. And then the other thing is that the chips that you get are going to include bark, nails, and other debris. So that's just going to be another factor. So we think that because there is simply so many tons of biomass in the form of chips available, that there are some economic opportunities that could be very exciting for biochar. I keep hitting the bottom part, so I apologize. So where we came at this from is that there's been a lot of work in EAB in the Chicago metropolitan region. The USDA Forest Service has provided, I think, up to about $4 million in funding for tree planting. The way those tree planting grants have been subgranted to municipalities has normally required them to provide a one-for-one removal. So they have to, if they want to fund the planting of a new tree, which is not going to be ash, it's going to be something else, they have to show that they have removed a tree. So this has actually had the impact of really forcing the municipalities to, in some cases, proactively remove, I think, about 3,500 trees. So one of the things that started happening is that people who are managing these programs started to get phone calls from the communities that had these tree planting grants saying, well, what do you think I should do with all these chips? Because nobody thought when they started funding the planting that people just didn't consider that. So that turned into one of these sort of nuisance issues for some of the municipalities. And then the other thing that was happening concurrently is that building material reuse is a growing market in Illinois. And building materials and reclaimed building materials are the result of sometimes when buildings are demolished, there are materials that can be salvaged, and then those are sold to a variety of different users and at quite a price so they can be used in furniture making. And so there is this idea that potentially urban wood could be a competitive building material and could be a high-value building material used for furniture. So these sorts of things, seem to make a lot of sense to look at urban wood as an economic engine. Then one of the things that we learned that the actual furniture opportunity from urban wood was relatively small. So what we did was we received some funding to look at what were the economic opportunities from urban wood, and we compared a series of different types of businesses, looking at startup costs, capital costs, operating costs, revenue, and profit and loss. And what we had to remember was that while things like furniture brought us into wanting to look at this, is that really only about 15% of the trees of the mass from the trees removed is going to be applicable for that. So if you really want to have a big impact, that you've got to focus on the chips. So we had to start looking for new types of business uses. So we looked at a variety of different types of businesses, and as we struggled with what to do with the chips, we wondered, I wonder if biochar may provide an opportunity. And we looked at potential business models for biochar with an agricultural focus, and then biochar as a boutique focus. And that's simply because we're located in the Chicago metropolitan region and urban gardening is very trendy. And I was at a garden shop and saw somebody was selling something for about $35 a bag, and I thought maybe there's an opportunity there too. They will buy it to grow good tomatoes. So So what we did was, as a not-for-profit interested in economic development, we decided that we wanted to look at all of these different types of business models, and we wanted to look at their sort of direct jobs and indirect jobs. But I have to say we had a really hard time when we got to biochar, because this is a nascent industry. But what we did find when we looked at a series of different types of economic benefits, and I'll just sort of bring us to this slide because it's a little bit easier to read, was that when we looked at the impacts that are on the left side, and those are actually categories that represent in total about 40 different types of economic impacts, that really, because there is so much available in the chips, that we had to focus on the chips. So one of the things that we did was we looked at, from all those potential different types of urban wood-based businesses, what was their impact to different types of beneficiaries. So we looked at the host, which would be the business that would, potentially make furniture or firewood or biochar, the municipality where this was located or had trees that were going to this, other businesses that might be able to use the product, and then society in general. And again, what we found is that if there's something that you can do with the most significant part of urban wood, which is the chips, then you're going to have a much greater impact. And then just one of the things which I'll go back to is that the reason why we factored this is that there's certain, as a mission-driven, not-for-profit, there's certain types of benefits that are more important to us than others. So it's not all going to be equally weighted. So what you'll see here, and we do have a paper where you can look up all our factors, is that these other uses of urban wood were simply less compelling. They had fewer opportunities. They didn't have a restorative environmental benefit in the same way that biochar does. And so we were really interested in seeing if there's an opportunity that can restore local economic and community benefits to these communities that are losing so many trees. So this is just a table of comparing some of the environmental impacts, but I'm going to keep going. And then the other thing is that, well, this is a little bit of a thought experiment. We became really passionate and we really want to pursue this, but there are some challenges. So we can't just say, like some of these business models that already exist, we can't just say, I know, let's get some money and get started tomorrow. There are a lot of things that we have to figure out. So one thing, and I put resource competition, is that anaerobic digestion is now going to become a competitor for wood chips. And so the wood chips that may have been so easy for us to get before, there may be competition for. So one of the things that we've done in the past is we've emailed foresters to say, how many wood chips could we get? And then this email has been forwarded to forestry listservs, and you get 100 emails saying, when can I send you 2 truckloads of wood chips? And I'm thinking that that's probably going to be changing simply because of anaerobic digestion in the Chicago metropolitan area. The other thing is that another competing use for wood chips is that municipalities who are removing trees are typically using chips on site, giving them to other taxing bodies for free, or even just having a sort of a free take arrangement with their residents. So again, we're going to be competing with that. The other thing is that there are a lot of low-cost chips that are used for site remediation, and that's another sort of competitor. Another group of challenges that we have, and I think this goes to more if we were to form a biochar business, what would we actually be doing, is that this is a little bit of a tough supply to aggregate. Municipalities are wonderful at being municipalities, but they are not businesses. And so for them, transferring the wood chips to a private business for profit is a challenging sort of thing. There are transportation considerations, and there's the whole, do you go with a mobile setup versus a single location, which again, this all goes to sort of what are the challenges with implementation. And then the big question is technology. Which is the right technology? And just to allude to one of the earlier presentations, if the best biochar is from a single source feedstock, we have to go into this knowing that we are starting with a big mess of different things, and that is going to be a determinant for us. So those are, just some of the biggest challenges that we face, in addition to many others. But we're really excited to be here and really excited to talk with anybody about their ideas about how we could move forward. So with that, if there's questions, I'd love to take them.